After you download your last name biker.zip, you'll see that you need to rename it. So let's just call it last name. And just like before, we need to organize the files. So I'll make 2 new folders, put them both inside there. And one will be graphics, and one will be sound effects. Okay, so in here we have a bunch of different graphics, and right now they're not resized. Generally speaking, again, you want to try to make things as big as you possibly can because you can always scale things down, but because After Effects primarily works in terms of raster images, in fact exclusively, you do want the highest resolution possible just in case. So we're going to save a copy of this just like we did before. Now this hue and saturation adjustment layer is only affecting this biker. So I can leave that in there and have that in my After Effects file, but it's really just there to adjust the color a little bit. So I'm going to select those 2 layers, then do Command E to merge them, Command E, and it takes the name of the topmost layer, so I'm just going to call this biker. And before I go any further, I'm going to save a copy of this because this is the one that's going to have changes to it that are destructive. So I'm going to go back to that graphics folder, and I'm going to call this my last name underscore stuntbiker.psd. All right. Now, what I'm going to go ahead and put this guy behind that fence. He's going to have his scale changed a little bit. And likewise, I have these adjustment layers for the levels and the hue and saturation on the plane. Notice again that they're clipping masks. So they're only affecting the plane. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select all 3 of those layers. I'm going to do Command E, and I'll just leave that name planes. Now this plane, I do want it to be in front of everything, but it can be a little bit smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and scale it down to about 9 by 2.5 inches, ballpark, 9 by 2.5 inches. It can be a little bit smaller, but we don't want to have to make it too much smaller, but we definitely don't need that much resolution. So I'll go ahead and do Command S, or I'll hit return to apply that, Command S to save it. And then finally with this biker, he's going to bike behind this dune sign and also kind of behind this fence. That's why there's a separate layer for that fencing. But I don't want him to be quite that big, so I'm going to go ahead and scale him down and just sort of imagine how he's going to look biking along the dune and then, kind of behind this fencing right here and on his way. So his size is about, how big is he? He's about 5.5 by 9 inches. So I'll go ahead and set him to that scale and then hit return. So now everything's pretty much done. I am going to delete this background layer because we don't need it. So I'll double click on it to unlock it and then hit the trash can icon to delete it. So now this is pretty much ready for animation. So we have the dunes, the biker, the fence, the sign, and the plane. And the plane is just shied for the time being. Now, one thing I wanted to point out that we didn't talk about with the last exercise are these blue lines. When I first set up a Photoshop file, so if I go to New, and I know that I'm going to create it for film and video, I would use HDTV 1080p. This will be the standard that we'll use this semester. And then I would say Create. And you can see that it automatically creates these guidelines right here on the sides and on the top and the bottom. This is your title and action safe area. I'll close out of that. So when I first made this particular image, again, I used that same preset and it made these title and action safe areas. What that basically means is that on different sizes and aspect ratios of screens, there is the chance that some parts of things could get cropped off on those perimeters. So imagine an old cathode ray tube TV that's more square. You would definitely lose big chunks of those sides. So that's just there to make sure that you don't have critical things happening, right? Like let's say, here, let me grab the biker, right off to the side. And then you might not see parts of it because of different aspect ratios and different screens. The other thing that's handy about it is in terms of visual composition and balance. So if you have text animation or a lot of animated action, you want it to primarily happen inside this middlemost box. And that's just because if a lot of things are happening way on the edge, oftentimes it throws things off compositionally. So historically, these are there to make sure that things don't get cropped off on different aspect ratios of TVs and screens and things like that. But nowadays, it also relates to compositional balance. All right, so this guy is set up and ready. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command S to save, and then I'll quit out of it. And there he is. And then let's go ahead and open up After Effects. So you can make a new project. And I already have After Effects open, so pause the video if you need to. And then go to File and Import File. And I'll navigate to that folder. There's the graphics. And there's that graphic I just adjusted. Now again, we want to change this to composition, retain layer sizes. You should start memorizing that. And then we'll say open. It'll give us one last chance to change it if we forgot, and then we'll say open. All right, so again, remember, we have all our layers in the folder. We don't need to touch the folder or do anything with it. We just double click on the composition itself. Great, and then here we have the scene. So let's start thinking about the biker in relation to all these different objects. What we want the biker to do is basically bike down this hill and then pass a sign and then off the screen. So let's start by making a couple keyframes. Now the reason why I mentioned those grids is that they import in here as guides, and that's pretty handy, except if you move your biker around over towards the edge, you'll notice that it's probably snapping to those grid lines. Now a lot of the times that's really helpful. In our case, it's sort of annoying. So what we're going to do is turn them off. We'll go to View and we'll uncheck Snap to Guides. And now we can move them around and it doesn't try to snap to them. But we can also just hide them. So we can uncheck Show Guides. And now we just don't have to look at that. All right, so let's go ahead and lock a couple layers. So I'm going to lock the dunes. I don't want that to move. I'm going to lock the fence, and I'm going to lock the sign. So those three layers, the dunes, the fence, and the sign, we want to lock them. And then we're also going to shy them because we're not really going to do anything with those three layers. So they're just there. So I'm going to click on the shy switches and then hide those three layers. All right, there we go. So now I have the bike. I'll go ahead and hit P for position. Now the one thing is thinking about where he's gonna be moving from. So if we remember from the windmill, if I hit R to bring up rotation, so I'm hitting R on my keyboard, if I were gonna rotate, he's gonna rotate from sort of the middle of his bike, which would look like he's sort of skidding or not quite attached to the sand, which would make sense because he's biking in sand. But anyway, so we want to move that rotation point down to the base of his bicycle so that if he does wobble around, that it is happening in relation to where the bicycle or the unicycle is contacting with the sand. So I'm going to change the color of that again to, how about fuchsia? Oh, no, that's not that easy to see either, is it? Okay, there we go, cyan. So I changed the color of that to cyan. Now I'm going to grab that pan behind tool. So remember we did this last time. We're going to move that rotation point. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. There we go. I grab the pan behind tool and then I click and drag this down to kind of the bottom of that wheel right in the middle because that's sort of where I want him to pivot from. So that's going to be the rotation point of this guy on a bicycle. Now I'll go back to that selection tool and now I can try out that rotation and that looks a lot better. Okay, now we're going to reset that rotation to 0 because we really don't need to do anything with it. But now we're going to go back to position, so P for position, and I'm going to start him kind of off screen actually. So I'll imagine kind of how this arc of this sand dune goes and I'll just sort of position that bottom. I'm looking at where that bottom point of the bottom of the bicycle might be. And I'll say, okay, it's going to be kind of around there. So my playhead is at 0, and I'll go ahead and mark that first keyframe for position. Now I kind of have to decide how long do I want it to be for him to bike across the screen. So maybe 3.5 seconds. Let's try something like that. So I'll just click and drag his layer all the way down. So I've moved my playhead to 3.5 seconds, and then I clicked and dragged and moved him down, and it automatically makes this motion path. So now I can go back and play this, and that's okay. It's not great. It's pretty mechanical, isn't it? So let's think about how we can make this a little bit more organic. Well, the nice thing about this motion path is that it shows us exactly where he's going to be biking. And just like with Illustrator files, these handles at the beginning and the end keyframes can help us curve that path. So I'll try to zoom in on this so you can see a little bit better. It might not work. Let me try. Yeah, it doesn't really make a difference. All right, so go to your first keyframe, and you might be able to see a bigger dot. So it's kind of hard to see, but you should be able to see a bigger dot right here. If you click and drag that dot, you'll see that it becomes a Bezier handle, just like you have in Illustrator. Ta-da! So go ahead and move that handle so that it kind of follows the arc of that dune. There we go. And you can stretch it out, you can move it down, but you can use that to kind of adjust the curve of that angle. Now notice each of these tiny little dots in between there. The tiny little dots represent one keyframe. So if we zoom in back to the second one, let me go back to 50%. If we go back to that second one, you can see there's a big handle there. Now notice I have my playhead still at the beginning, but I have the second keyframe highlighted. And as long as that second keyframe is highlighted, I can click and drag that Bezier handle, and then I can kind of give this a little bit of an S-shaped curve. I'm going to stretch this out so that it's kind of following the S arc of that dune. And then I'll go back to that first keyframe. Notice if I actually click on that dot, it actually selects the actual keyframe. So if I move my playhead in between, I can click on this keyframe right here at the beginning, and it selects the keyframe right here at the beginning. So I'm going to stretch this out a little bit and just move it down, just so I can look at the arc of this path and see that it kind of follows that dune. Then I can do what's called scrubbing. So scrubbing is when you click and drag your playhead and move it along to just kind of see where the path of motion is going. And I just want to make sure that he doesn't go like way below that sand dune because my mask doesn't go that far. So I'll undo that. But now that looks pretty good. So he's going behind the sign, behind that fence that kind of fell over, and now he's off screen. And I can play this. And that looks okay. It's pretty mechanical still, isn't it though? So let's think about how we can make that a little bit better. Well, first, I'm just going to make it faster. So one of the principles of animation is timing. If I make this super, super fast, that is, if I move those two keyframes close together and I play this, you can see that's way too fast. Like we don't even really see what's happening. If I move this out to like 5 or 6 seconds and I try to play it, now you can see it's so slow, it's kind of boring and dull. In fact, you're probably like, ugh, let's get done with it. All right, so timing is one of the first principles of animation you're trying to figure out. And the way you figure it out is you move those keyframes a lot farther apart or a lot closer together, but you try to figure out where that sweet spot is. So I'll try 2 seconds. That's still a little too fast. How about 2.5 seconds? That looks pretty good. And this is one of those things you kind of figure out by animating a lot. So try it really fast, try it really slow, and try to figure out what's about right. That looks pretty good. Move it a little bit closer. We're going to use one more principle of animation in here, and this is easing. So last time we explored easy ease in and easy ease out. So this time we want him to actually just look like he's going a little bit faster in the middle. And the best way to do that is to simply have him ease out and then ease in. So I'll do Control click on that first keyframe. I'll go to Keyframe Assistant and then do Easy Ease Out. So he should start slower and then gradually speed up. There we go. Now I want to do the same thing at the end because I want it to look like he's losing a little velocity as he's sort of evening out. So I'll Control click on that second keyframe, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease In. Now I can play this through, and it sort of looks like he loses a little speed there. That's okay. I can keep playing around with the timing of this too, so I can make this a little bit faster, and I can keep playing around with those Bezier curves to try to give the result that I want. Oh, that's because I haven't saved it yet. So make sure you save this project as your last name, _biker.aep, and we're going to set it inside the biker folder, so with all those other folders.